Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Really glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. A lot to talk about today. Some absolute insanity out of Harvard that has nothing to do with Harvard's ongoing fight with the Trump administration. Harvard actually ended tenure for a professor for the first time since the 40s and for the most hilarious reason possible. We'll also be talking about how Elon Musk is not happy with the big, beautiful bill. And we'll also talk about how it's nice to have a different leadership structure at the FBI. We're actually going to try and get to the bottom of some things which were inconvenient for the left. And so they just decided that we'll never know what happened in these particular stories. So we'll get to that in just a second. So, Jim, it's always nice to know that people actually want to figure out the truth of some of these things.
The truth is out there, as one Fox television show said. We'll be talking about another show on another network in just a few moments.
Yeah, no kidding. But first, let's talk about a major breakthrough, and it deals with aging. We all age, unfortunately, and have you started noticing signs like poor sleep, low energy, stiff joints, maybe even some more serious health concerns than that? Well, aging is personal, and we all feel it in different ways, and that's why we're excited to talk about C15 from Fatty 15. C15 is the first essential fatty acid to be discovered in more than 90 years. It's an incredible scientific breakthrough to support our long-term health and wellness and improve our aging and longevity.
Fatty 15 co-founder Dr. Stephanie Venn Watson discovered the benefits of C15 while working with the U.S. Navy to enhance the health of aging dolphins. No word on whether it can do any good for those in Miami. Backed by more than 100 studies, C15 is now known to strengthen cells and slow biological aging at the cellular level.
Fatty 15 is on a mission to optimize your C15 levels to help you live healthier and longer. You can get an additional 15% off their 90-day subscription starter kit by going to fatty15.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout. That's fatty15.com/3ml, code 3ml. Well, Jim, our Gen X audience is going to love this, and folks maybe a tad older than that. But one of the things that's great about a change of administration, particularly from Democrat to Republican, is that those inconvenient stories and quote-unquote investigations that if they actually got to a conclusion would potentially be embarrassing or distracting or even lead to a full-blown scandal. But two stories in particular got buried during the Biden years, and now Kash Patel and Dan Bongino at the FBI say, you know what? It's time to dig into these a little more. So, Jim, you thought this was appropriate music to bring us in, and so do I. Now, you got to imagine Robert Stack in his trench coat emerging from the fog. There's no murders here. No ghosts necessarily, but no, the FBI is looking specifically into who leaked the Dobbs ruling from the Supreme Court back in 2022. Remember, we had a very frantic investigation going into that, which ended in a giant shrug. And the same thing from the 2023 investigation into who left cocaine at the White House. We've all had a pretty good idea, but now the investigation will hopefully either confirm that or lead to the person who actually did it. So, Jim, I always love watching either the ardent never-Trumpers who turn into never-conservatives or the liberals talking about how, it's a politicized Justice Department now. The fact that these never really got thoroughly investigated or got given up on before they got to a conclusion shows there was plenty of politics going on at the DOJ then, too.
Well, Greg, let me start out by apologizing for those who are the younger side of Generation X. I know that the sound of that music just gave you a traumatic flashback because Robert Stack was about to tell you about a young person kind of like you who was kidnapped by a serial killer working with Bigfoot and aliens. Often all in the same case. You heard that music, something terrible had happened to somebody and you'd be entranced by it. An ordinary day at the White House when a giant pile of cocaine is found in a personal lobby. Who could, with the West Executive Avenue entrance to the White House, who do we know in the White House who consumed massive amounts of cocaine? Was there anyone in the White House at that time who had written in his autobiography that he was smoking crack every 15 minutes? The hunter for this perpetrator will be continuing. And then the leaker, look, a whole bunch of us have suspicions that, between the electronic abilities to track where documents get sent, and apparently they did polygraphs of people who worked at the Supreme Court. People always found it very strange. It was the biggest and most consequential leak of a sensitive information from the Supreme Court in decades and ages. And they investigated. They were told it was very thorough. And at the end, the answer of the Supreme Court organization was, nah, we don't know. Just can't figure it out. Now, if it was... You figure if it was some clerk, that clerk would have gotten fired. The consequences for the reputation of the court would be bad, but not insurmountable. If a justice had leaked that, then the consequences would be very, very serious. And you might even see an effort to impeach a justice on the court. Now, it could have been anyone. Sotomayor! But it could have been anybody. But there are a lot of people who believe that that's why this investigation had to end inconclusively. That if the truth was too horrible to the court's reputation for it to survive, therefore the whole thing had to be swept under the rug. I salute Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. By the way, there were a whole bunch of things I disagree with my friend Kurt Schlichter about, but he wrote a column where he was basically mad at the people who said the moment Kash Patel and Dan Bongino said, yeah, we looked at the Jeffrey Epstein files and he killed himself. Now, I enjoyed the joke. I'd better get to work because otherwise, this painting, much like Jeffrey Epstein, isn't going to hang itself.
Yes.
But nonetheless, there's been, you'd figure if anybody in the world would be highly motivated to get to this, particularly if the trail led back to a Democrat. And of course, there are 1,000,001 conspiracy theories that Hillary Clinton had done it. Dan Bongino, Kash Patel look at it and say, yeah, it was a suicide. Well, there are some people who are reacting, well, clearly the conspiracy got to them. In February, Dan Bongino was saying, we got to turn over these rocks and we got to get to the bottom of this. Apparently, you turn over the rock and you find the bottom of a rock. There is not actually some deeper, vast conspiracy. So Kurt Schlichter writes this column saying, come on, conservatives, stop complaining. Dan Bongino is not going to suddenly, march in lockstep and all that stuff. And then when I wrote about this, some people said, Jim, if the trail led back to Trump, Dan Bongino and Kash Patel would help cover it up. And in this scenario, Greg, this means that after 4 years of investigating Trump by Merrick Garland, Jack Smith, Alvin Bragg, every law, there's actually evidence out there that Donald Trump killed Jeffrey Epstein, and they said, nope, let's go after him on falsifying business records. That'll take him down, instead of, conspiracy to commit murder. So the bottom line is, I suspect somebody had to leak this information. The idea that all of the resources were completely incapable of getting to the bottom of it emits an odor. I'm glad the investigations are reopened. Maybe we don't get any further answers, and maybe it ends up with another... there is no Robert Stack-esque actor who could take over. I know they revived the show on Netflix. I always get annoyed when there are these things and, we just don't know, which was the answer for the origins of COVID for quite a while from quite a few law enforcement agencies and investigative agencies. So good luck, guys. Hope you get to the bottom of all this.
Yeah, I do too. I'd love to see the Epstein list or whatever they've got of it, if it exists. That has been promised, but not released yet. But in terms of these cases, you got to think the number of people who could have done this is fairly limited. So you can drill down pretty quickly on this. I'm guessing it's somebody from the 4 dissenters who was trying to sway one of the remaining conservatives who could have theoretically changed their position before the opinion was actually released. The number of suspects there cannot be that long. My favorite part of Unsolved Mysteries was getting to the end of the story and hoping that there was an update where they actually caught the person. That was always a nice, happy ending. But yes, when it comes to the discovery of cocaine in the White House, or it comes to who released the Dobbs decision, join us. Maybe you can help solve a mystery.
That's a very good Robert Stack impression. I'm just going to point out that my favorite one is, I've been here all day and I haven't seen a single ghost.
Yeah, the longer the series went on, the more they got into that kind of stuff, so it wasn't quite as fun.
It overlapped with Art Bell.
Yeah, the cases were much, much better in the beginning of that show, but he was perfect as the host. All right, Ground News. Ground News is a fantastic site to not only figure out what the news is, but to figure out the bias that's coming from the different sources that you read. So understanding that bias before you read the articles is really helpful. And like we talked about yesterday, when it came to the NPR story suing the Trump administration over defunding PBS and NPR, the left is talking about how it's a constitutional crisis. There's no freedom of speech for tax dollars going to PBS. But there's also the argument about whether Trump can do that unilaterally. Meanwhile, there's some pejorative words on the right regarding NPR and PBS because they do tilt far left a lot of the time. But if you want to understand what the news actually is and understand the slant that's coming from these different sources, check out Ground News.
You can expand your view of the news by signing up for your Ground News account today. You can get access to the mobile app, website, browser extension, and exclusive newsletters so you can have a well-rounded view of the world, think critically about what you read, and find common ground between perspectives.
Visit groundnews.com/martini today to get 40% off the Ground News Vantage plan and get access to all of their news analysis features. That's groundnews.com/martini for 40% off the Ground News Vantage plan for a limited time only. All right, Jim, on to our second martini now. And Elon Musk, of course, not in the headlines as much because he's not in charge of Doge, and Doge is kind of running out the run here. They're only supposed to be auditing these different parts of our government for a number of months. But Musk is not happy with the one big, beautiful bill that passed the House by one vote last week. Should have been three. A couple of Republicans either drifted off to sleep or got delayed getting to the floor. Now it's up to the Senate, and some senators saying we really got to gut this thing and do a lot of things differently. Mike Johnson saying, look, we barely got this across the finish line. Let's not tinker with this too much. So we'll see what happens in the Senate and what happens once they have to come to a House-Senate conference on this, assuming it ever gets through the Senate. But Elon Musk is not a fan of the bill. And the reason he's not a fan of the bill is because he thinks it spends too much money, which runs directly in contrast to the point of Doge over the past few months. Here's what he said to David Pogue in an interview with CBS News.
So, I was disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, not just decrease it, and undermines the work that the Doge team is doing.
I actually thought that when this big, beautiful bill came along. I mean, everything he's done on Doge gets wiped out in the first year.
I think a bill can be big or it can be beautiful, but I don't know if it can be both. My personal opinion.
I kind of like that line, Jim, because one of the big complaints we've had about it, there's a lot of good stuff in there, but there is not a real aggressive effort to cut spending in a lot of different areas. And so that's frustrating. I find it hilarious that CBS News is suddenly concerned about the amount of government spending. Elon Musk is being consistent here, saying our debt's out of control, our deficits are out of control, trillions of dollars a year on the deficits. And this is the Republicans' big chance right now with control of the House, Senate, and the White House to do some real change. And when it comes to the amount of government spending, it's just not happening.
Yeah, this is our bad martini. You could say it's a good martini, and I kind of applaud Elon Musk for coming out and saying what he really thinks and not being afraid to contradict the president and not being afraid to shine a spotlight on the aspects of the bill that a lot of Republicans would probably prefer to avert their eyes from. But the bill is what it is, and it increases, the deficit significantly over the next couple of years. One of the reasons I'm glad we're talking about this is I have a piece that will be in the next issue of the magazine. It's due tomorrow, and length is not going to be an issue. The current title is Doge's Disappointments. I was tempted to call it Doge's Failures. I guess it's a little bit harsh, but Elon and Doge have had a very, tough run here, and you can point the blame in a whole bunch of different directions. There are a whole bunch of people in the cabinet who did not like the cuts that he wanted to make, and particularly the firings of staffers and employees that he wanted to make. And it's understandable that if you're running a cabinet agency, you probably feel like you should have the final say on those sorts of things. But I think more notably, the big, beautiful bill, as they call it, this is going to undo it. And it did not help that Musk, back at the Madison Square Garden rally, announced that they were going to cut $2 trillion. Apparently, he was supposed to say $1 trillion. And Musk just on a whim decided he was going to double it, which is less than ideal, careful planning. Let's keep in mind also that last fiscal year, fiscal 2024, total non-discretionary spending, which means you take out Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, all the stuff that the government has to pay for. Everything else, defense, almost all domestic spending that is not entitlements, is $1.8 trillion. So cutting $2 trillion from the budget was going to be very difficult to begin with. Fairly quickly, they said, okay, we're aiming for $1 trillion. Last I checked, they're at $160 billion. Billion with a B, not with a TR. That's good. Let's say if they keep this up, it's conceivable they could have 200 billion with a B by the end of the year, which is not bad. The problem is that our deficit is going to be 1.9 trillion for next year. The deficit's going to be bigger despite all the Doge cuts, and a lot of that is interest on the debt. A lot of that is the growth in entitlements. A lot more year by year. The last of the baby boomers are retiring. It means to spend more on Social Security. It means to spend more on Medicare. You and I have been talking about the need for entitlement reform for a long time on this podcast, and Republicans don't want to talk about it. Well, the end result is that Doge is, trimming a little bit here, trimming a little bit there. And by the way, if the programs are wasteful, go ahead and cut them. But don't fool yourself into believing that you're actually taking serious action on the deficit and the debt. And something like the big, beautiful bill, which is not just extending the current tax cuts, but remember, we want to get rid of tax on tips. We want to get rid of tax on overtime. We want to expand a whole bunch of things. We increase the state and local tax deduction from $10,000, which, a bunch of Republicans in places like New York, New Jersey, and California didn't like. Now we're raising it to $40,000, which, quadrupling it. These are the sorts of things that reduce the amount of revenue coming into the government, which is the sort of thing that exacerbates the deficit, which is the sort of thing that increases the debt. So kudos to you, Elon Musk, for calling it as it is. I suppose you could say he's done this the entire time, calling Navarro a moron, things like that. He's never been shy about his opinions, but I think this is something where Republicans did not get the job done the way they had boasted they were going to. If you couldn't get government to reduce spending significantly under circumstances like this, it is very hard to imagine a scenario in which they do this until the entitlements start to crash.
Yeah, as a proud Reagan supply sider, I do believe that cutting taxes actually leads to more revenue, and I think ultimately that will happen. I like making the tax cuts permanent because the tax increase right now would be disastrous for so many American families and the economy at large. I like the Medicaid work requirements. I like cutting the funding off for trans surgeries for minors. I don't know what the price tag is on that. We're allegedly defunding Planned Parenthood. There's some dispute about that on Capitol Hill. I'd love to see that as well. But in terms of actually cutting spending, you got to do it. It's much harder now than it would have been if we had been responsible for this over the past few decades. But you got to make some real efforts at it. To not do that when you have that opportunity is a missed opportunity. And so I understand Musk's frustration because this is obviously one of his major priorities in supporting Donald Trump last year. So hopefully some more trimming can be done in the Senate version, maybe when they get back together. But when the margins are this thin in the House, you have to placate a lot of people and you have to make horrible deals like the state and local tax deduction situation because you got to bail out the blue states for making horrible fiscal decisions all the time.
I don't know about you, Greg, but my doctor's been telling me salt was going to kill me for a long time. And turned out to might be true for the country, too.
I know. And one of the things that these supporters will say is, we do have spending cuts. They kick in 2029. I'm like, yeah, in a Congress that has
when you're out of office.
Yeah.
When you're long gone.
They're not at all required to follow through on what you promised they would do. It just doesn't work that way. So tough choices are not easy, obviously, but you still got to make them. So
we're going to eat a lot, but we swear 4 or 5 years from now, we're going on a phenomenal diet and exercise regimen. Everything's going to turn out okay. Yeah, my doctor doesn't like that proposal when I put it there either.
Boy, this ad always seems to come up right after we talk about the spending bill up on Capitol Hill. If you want to understand economics and how they're supposed to work and how they work best, you need to understand capitalism. And if you want to understand how capitalism works, don't go to most colleges. They'll tell you how evil it is, how greedy it is, how it's just unfair all the way across the board, when it's really the system that has increased wealth beyond anything comparable to before capitalism took effect. And now Hillsdale College, which will teach you the truth on this, I can attest to that, they will help you understand this through a free online course entitled Understanding Capitalism.
In addition to that new course, which should be required for anyone who has any role in the federal budget, Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free online courses. You can learn about the U.S. Constitution, the stories in the book of Genesis, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, or the history of the ancient Christian church with Hillsdale College's free online courses.
In the 7 lectures of Understanding Capitalism, you'll learn about the role of profit and loss, how human nature plays a role in our economic system, and why capitalism is ultimately a system that encourages morality, not undermine it. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll in this course, Understanding Capitalism. There is no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll for free. Well, we just talked about how strong Hillsdale College is. I don't think this is going to happen there, but it's happened at Harvard. A Harvard professor, Jim, for the first time since the 1940s, has been stripped of tenure and fired from the Harvard faculty. Chew on that one for a moment, and we might a little bit later in the conversation. But why a faculty member has been dismissed is just perfect. This is the New York Post version of the story. A renowned Harvard University professor was stripped of her tenure and fired after an investigation found that she fabricated data on multiple studies focused on Dishonesty. Yes, Francesca Gino, a celebrated behavioral scientist at Harvard Business School, was let go after the school's top governing board determined that she tweaked observations in 4 studies so that their findings boosted her hypotheses. Harvard administrators notified business faculty that Gino was out of a job in a closed-door meeting this past week. Harvard did not detail the professor's firing or tenure being stripped, citing it as a personal matter, but told GBH News that the school had not revoked a professor's tenure in decades. So basically what happened here, she had authored over 140 scholarly papers and snagged numerous awards, but had come under scrutiny in 2023 when a trio of behavioral scientists published a series of blog posts on data colada with evidence accusing 4 of her papers published between 2012 and 2020 that she had co-authored contained fraudulent data. A preliminary investigation into her work by Harvard was launched in October 2021 following concerns about a study she co-authored that claimed requiring individuals to sign an honesty pledge at the beginning of a form rather than the end significantly boosted honest responses. So, Jim, there's nothing that just makes me laugh harder than getting fired for faking your data while studying dishonesty.
You know, they said Harvard hadn't revoked tenure for anyone in decades. I believe this is the absolute worst scandal involving dishonesty since Harvard professor Joe Isuzu back in the late 80s. Once again, for our Generation X listeners out there. So there's a story that goes around that when Bill Clinton was governor of Arkansas, that there was a controversy about statewide testing and educational testing. Too many kids were failing. And people were outraged by it. So he conducted a poll. This might have been Dick Morris, might not. Like, what percentage do you think of students should fail statewide testing? And, you know, the idea was a very low amount, but it was something like, let's say, 5%, 10%, something like that. So the following year, he set the standard to ensure that the right amount would fail, which is really not the way you think you'd want to do it, but it was a way of generating a result that made it just seemed right and looked right for everybody. You keep hearing stories indicating that there's all kinds of fraudulent research going on in academic circles. There's a lot of tweaking of the numbers, a lot of goosing, a lot of adjusting and massaging the numbers in order to make sure that the results are more dramatic or support the theory or you get the result that they wanted to see. I don't know if that's the case. I'm not involved in this. However, look, anecdotally, you keep hearing about this sort of stuff. Maybe my favorite example, I don't know, Greg, if you or other listeners watch the NBC show The Irrational. It's got Jesse L. Martin, and we've seen all kinds of, shows where the genius decides to help the cop. Well, he's a behavioral scientist at this fictional university in Washington, and he helps the FBI. By all of his research in behavioral science, he knows how people are going to react, that even though human beings are irrational, they can be predictably irrational and all that stuff. It's based on the work of, very, very loosely based on the work of Dan Ariely, behavioral economist professor at Duke University, and his nonfiction book, Predictably Irrational, The Hidden Forces That Shape Our Decisions. There have been accusations that Ariely faked his research for that one. I don't know if that's the case. My understanding is that's still being litigated. I think probably a more accurate, more common problem, particularly in the field of behavioral science, is that the results of a particular experiment are not replicatable. That they conduct the study, they have the people react a certain way, and you go, aha, well, when people are put in these circumstances with these incentives, they react this way. The problem is somebody else comes along with a different group of people, same circumstances, and they get a different result. Whether it's dishonesty or whether it's just a matter of, yeah, the experiment worked in that set of circumstances, but there's some other X factor going on around that you don't know about that. If I were Harvard, I would, and there really is as much, either falsification or tweaking of the numbers going around. I would pick one professor a year, or do some, look at a whole bunch of them. Find one to be your Joe Isuzu, who you make an example of, and you say, aha, this person has falsified their data, throw them to the hounds. This whole thing, well, it's a personal matter. But is it a personal matter or a personnel matter? But if you're falsifying research, isn't that of public interest? Isn't that the sort of thing the public should be aware of? Oh, it turns out that actually putting a statement at the top of your paper does not alter people's behavior. The other thing is that apparently it says that it was exaggerated. So let's say it improved the honesty of the answers 51% of the time instead of the 80% or whatever this professor had said. Well, I still think that's interesting. Why did you need to tweak the number? What, like the point of the research is the results. It's not to, my theory had to be, sometimes come out and say your theory was wrong. It's okay. You're a theorist. You're supposed to. So anyway, decent show. Don't know if I trust academics. Black eye for Harvard. But then again, not exactly a shortage of those going around these days.
Exactly. So, I mean, there's so many thoughts rattling around my head after this story, Jim. First of all, the first professor to lose their job after getting tenure at Harvard since the 40s. It's really hard to get fired from Harvard once you have tenure. And I'm guessing it's that way at a lot of other schools. And I'm guessing not everyone who's ever gotten tenure has been a stellar professor. So once you're in, you really got to mess up.
They weed out the bad ones. They didn't hire Kaczynski.
That's true.
A lot of research on how damaging the technology is to the human experience. Some people said it was a booming field and that his work was on fuego, as they used to say on SportsCenter.
Secondly, this professor's work less consequential, but it reminds me when you talk about falsified research of how Devlin McGregor falsified their research to give us Provasic.
Oh, yeah. I just want to point out, I'm watching the start of the show Suits, the one that has Meghan Markle in it and all that stuff on Netflix. Greg, out of nowhere, there's a reference to a pharmaceutical company called Devlin McGregor in the pilot episode. That can't be a coincidence. So clearly, and I'm like, this is the one they framed Richard Kimball. But unfortunately, the Suits lawyers are just worried about some other issue. They don't really bother to get into that.
Exactly. Meghan Markle might falsify her research too. I don't know. But quite a day already. So, Jim, we'll see what the news cycle has on tap for us tomorrow. See you then.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch podcast if you don't already, and tell your friends to join us as well. We'd love to have them listening. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. They really are a big help to us. Also, you can check out the 3 Martini Lunch anytime on those home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corombos. Have a great Wednesday, and join us again Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.